Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Gut Reset Summit. I'm your host, Dr. John Dempster. And today I am joined by a superstar, Dr. William Davis. Many of you are going to be familiar with his work, and he's been doing some amazing things for many years. But, he's been the author of so many groundbreaking books. He's got a brand new one called Super Gut that we're going to be really leveraging today. And he's been all over Dr. Oz. And gosh, you can tell us all the other things. Live with Kelly, I believe, and all sorts of other major TV and online presence that I've been following for years. So, Dr. Davis, look, we're going to get into your story in a second here, but great to have you on the Gut Reset Summit. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, happy to be here.
So tell us, listen, most of us who've been in this space for long enough remember you from the Wheat Belly days, right? That's really, I think, one of your most groundbreaking books. But tell us, how did you get into you're a traditional cardiologist. How did you get into this space?
Well, it was a series of events and blunders, to be honest. And so it started with my mom dying of sudden cardiac death after her 2-vessel coronary angioplasty in New Jersey, where I grew up. And of course, I was doing those procedures in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I just moved to Milwaukee to set up hospitals with their new technologies. I was the guy who did all this laser and stents and rotational atherectomy, all the things you do to open arteries. Here, my mom dies of a disease that I managed in a cath lab. But it was a vivid illustration of how pointless, how useless, how silly it is to try to manage a dangerous disease like coronary disease, heart attack, sudden cardiac death, in a procedure lab. You can't do it. That's why people die en route, in the ambulance, or at home. And so it became clear. I asked this question: well, what could I have done with my mom a year ahead of time, 2 years, 5 years to predict it? Of course, conventional thinking is use cholesterol, which is completely absurd. It's nonsense. Cholesterol is the vehicle for pharma profits. It has nothing to do with heart disease or reducing heart disease. But how could we identify risks? Well, the only device back then, and it remains true today, that really gives you a timeline, not just identifying the disease, but giving you a timeline for when things will happen. The only test is a CT heart scan with that yields a coronary calcium score. My friend John Rumberger, when he was at Mayo Clinic, developed this technology and the methods, and they showed that if you quantify calcium, it represents 20% of total atherosclerotic plaque volume. So it's a dipstick. It's a gauge of plaque. The more plaque you have, the more potential you have for rupture. People think, because my colleagues tell them this, we're looking for severe blockages. You're not looking for severe blockages. You're looking for any degree of atherosclerotic plaque because it erupts like a little volcano. And that's how you die. It erupts and then causes a blood clot to form. And that's why you can have a 30% blockage, which seems of no consequence, and then die tomorrow, because it erupts and causes a blood clot. Well, anyway, so I set up the first heart scan device in Wisconsin, one of the first in the Midwest, one of the first in the country. And we're scanning people left and right, called it Milwaukee Heart Scan. It's gone now. But anyway, we're scanning thousands of people. And you know what? When you look for hidden heart disease, you find it. But what do you do about it? So back then, this is 27, 28 years ago. It's a long time ago. So back then, someone comes in and says, oh, my dad had a heart attack at 58. I'm 52. Am I in store? Is the same kind of future in store for me? So we scanned this guy, and maybe his score is 300. Normal is 0. No plaque. His score is 300. Well, we help publish these data. If you do nothing, the score increases by 25% per year. It's horrifying. Once you have it, it grows like weeds. Well, what happens if you go on the best they have in conventional healthcare? Baby aspirin, a high dose of a statin cholesterol drug, low fat, low saturated fat diet, exercise program, all the stuff that gets passed off as a heart disease prevention program. How fast does it grow? 25% per year. Has no impact at all on this measure. And you see the score go from 300 to 375 to 490, whatever. And then you eventually die or have a heart attack or have some other cardiac event. And so what do? At a practical level, I have thousands of people freaking out, right? Oh, my score went up again. What do I do? Of course, my colleagues, many of whom are unscrupulous, dishonest, do things for money, not for health. And they say, well, we'll do the real test. We'll do a heart catheterization, see if you need a preventive stent or bypass surgery, which, by the way, is malpractice, but it's done all the time because it makes a lot of money. Healthcare is about money, right? It's all about money. What comes at the bottom line in the doctor's pocket or the healthcare system? Well, I was disgusted by that. I stopped doing procedures because I was so disgusted. But I had to find out, how do you put a stop to this? So a lot of zigzagging, a lot of trial and error, but it led to some really important lessons. One, get rid of cholesterol. If you get a cholesterol panel, take a nice big black magic marker and cross out the values because they mean nothing. Instead, you do something more sophisticated, a lipoprotein test. And you'll see that time and time again, people with coronary disease have an abundance of small LDL particles, not LDL cholesterol, this indirect gauge of the particles in the bloodstream that cause heart disease. You can actually measure those particles. Problem, most doctors, as you know, don't understand this because it takes effort and education, and it doesn't lead to drug use. It leads to diet changes because it's clear from existing evidence going back 30 years, not my evidence, other people's evidence, that small LDL particles are caused by two things: grains and sugar. Period. That's it. The amylopectin A carbohydrate unique to grains and sugars, sucrose, fructose, etc. So I asked people to take the grains and sugars out of the diet. That was a turning point because when I asked people to do that, they'd come back, 3 months later, whatever. They'd say, hey, you didn't tell me I would lose 57 pounds. You didn't tell me my migraine headaches, psoriasis, seborrhea, depression, anxiety, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, type 2 diabetes, hypertension would go away. You didn't tell me that. Well, I don't know why it went away. It became clear that, but I just stumbled on this. And what back then I thought, well, now how can this be? We do the opposite of what all dietary guidelines, doctors, and dietitians tell us to do. And I see transformations in health. I see diseases disappear. And so that was the start of Wheat Belly. The turning point was a woman, a school teacher, 38 years old, and she comes to me for something trivial, a palpitations, flip-flop feeling. It turned out to be nothing, so I reassured her. But she's sitting in my office like this, holding her abdomen. I said, what's wrong? She says, well, it's my ulcerative colitis. I'm hemorrhaging. I have constant diarrhea and pain. I'm on Asacol, prednisone, and a biologic drug at many thousands of dollars per month, and it's not working. They're giving me transfusions every 2 to 3 months. So my gastroenterologist says it's time to remove your colon. 38-year-old school teacher, and you know what happens when you have a colon removal, colectomy. You have an ileostomy bag that makes these pooping sounds all the time. It smells bad. You have a hole in your abdomen. You don't recover from that. You don't regrow a colon, right? So I said, well, you were here for palpitations, so I haven't really gotten into diet and other things with you. Let me tell you what I do with other people, like with coronary disease. I said, we eliminate all wheat and grains. She says, no. She says, no, they biopsied me twice. I don't have celiac disease. They did all the blood tests. I don't have celiac disease. I get that. They're going to remove your colon. What do you have to lose? So she does it. Comes back a month later, big smile, jumps on the table. And I said, tell me what happened. She said, well, within the first 5 days, all the bleeding, diarrhea stopped. All the abdominal pain stopped. I stopped my first drug. 2 weeks later, I was completely better. I stopped the second drug. I then stopped the third drug. I went back to this is what really got me. I went back to my gastroenterologist to schedule the colectomy. Mm-hmm. And he says, what happened? She says, look at me. I lost 37 pounds. I didn't even tell her that she'd lose weight. So she, by accident, loses 37 pounds. And she's slender and healthy. She says, I'm cured. I don't have ulcerative colitis. And he says, well, what did you do? She says, well, she told him. And he says, it's a coincidence. Go back to what you were doing. And it's that kind of indifference and ignorance, this willful ignorance. I witness cure, and I just dismiss it as coincidence or who knows what. Mm-hmm. And that's what when I said, that's it. I can't keep my mouth shut. I got to. That was the birth of the crazy series, Wheat Belly series.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you for that. I mean, I remember hearing that story. I think I've even seen you present that live, and that never gets old, hearing that. And, you've done a number of great books that have come out in sequence to that. Today, what I'm really stoked about is on the sort of back end of your new book, the Super Gut book. We're going to talk a lot about missing microbes and how that can really impact not only our gut health, but also our metabolism. You've already alluded to the fact that subtle dietary changes can have massive roles to play for, losing that excess body fat, but also keeping our body moving, the engine working the way it should be. So let's get into this a little bit more here. First of all, I guess the biggest question I have is, why are we missing these beneficial organisms?
The biggest culprit is probably the overuse of antibiotics. As you know, there's a time and place for antibiotics. If you've got pneumococcal pneumonia and you're septic and you're delirious, you need an antibiotic. But of course, it's used for trivial purposes too. You have a cough, dry cough, it's just a viral upper respiratory infection, and you get a course of antibiotics. So most people by age 40 have taken 30 courses of antibiotics. It's especially bad with children. So for every 1,000 children, there's over 1,300 prescriptions written every year. So there's this wild overuse of antibiotics. Well, and we used to think that the diarrhea you had after taking some antibiotics was just an oddity, a curiosity, right? No, it represents you just killed off trillions of microbes, hundreds of species, and many of these species did good things for us. Not all microbes are important, but many microbes are. So we've killed them off, and then we, of course, compounded it by silly things like glyphosate, the active ingredient in the herbicide Roundup, which is now ubiquitous. If we measure anybody's urine, hair, blood, skin, we all have glyphosate now. And glyphosate, yes, is an herbicide, but it's also an antibiotic. But it's an antibiotic that is selective in killing healthy microbes and is not effective in killing pathogenic microbes. So it selects for unhealthy microbial species. Then there's other things like food preservatives that are meant to kill off microbes in food, but it also kills off microbes in you. Food additives like emulsifying agents like polysorbate 80 and carboxymethylcellulose and others that emulsify or disperse the intestinal mucus barrier, which is very, very important. We don't think much about mucus, but it's very important to protect you from microbes and food, partially digested food. And then there's drugs like stomach acid blocking drugs. Stomach acid is an essential block to the descent of oral microbes. The mouth is second only to the colon in density of microbes. So stomach acid is a protective barrier against oral microbes, as well as a protective barrier against the ascent of colonic fecal organisms. So modern people, because of that, are infested now with both oral and fecal microbes in places where they don't belong. And there's other factors like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents, statin cholesterol drugs, and the list goes on.
Your favorite. We've also seen how stress can change that too, right?
Yes. So for a variety of reasons, we've all had and it's getting worse and worse with each passing generation because we pass our disrupted microbiome onto our children, they in turn to their children, et cetera. So year over year, it's getting worse and worse. And I think we've kind of reached a turning point in the last 10 years or so where there's so much irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, depression, anxiety, food intolerances. If our grandmothers were here and we said, "Hey, Grandma, I can only eat 9 foods, and all of the foods give me stomach aches, allergy, asthma attacks, etc." Your grandma said, "What the hell's wrong with you? No, these are just foods. There's nothing wrong with the food. There's something wrong with you." Grandma would know. But of course, in conventional healthcare, they have a drug for everything, right?
Often the case, yeah. We need to be realizing that that's just a massive Band-Aid. I know you know that. I know most people listening to this know that. We still got to get to the root of the issue. We got root cause resolution that we've got to dive into. And, I want to hear from you. What are some of these microbes that we should be looking at today? Is there anything that really tickles your fancy from the research and where we're going right now in terms of what bugs we should be focusing on and recolonizing in our system?
I chose to play with Lactobacillus reuteri, reuteri, first. And it just by sheer dumb luck, I happened upon probably one of the most important microbes of all. I was inspired by the work that got started at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It was a cancer group trying to understand why reuteri seems to have anti-cancer effects. It killed cancer cells. So they gave it to mice, and they noticed some odd things happening in these mice. Their fur would become, as they said, rich and luxuriant from an increase in sebum. They saw that if they inflicted a wound in the skin, that wound healing occurred twice as fast as usual. that hair grew faster, that mating behavior was increased in elderly mice, that elderly mice who lose muscle like humans do, we lose about a third of our muscle over time, is restored back to a youthful mouse. There's an increase in what's called Leydig cells in the testicles that produce testosterone. And there's a marked increase in testosterone. There's an increase in growth hormone. There's a restoration of youthful immunity. So on and on and on. So I got the same microbe they used in the study. It's commercially available. It's from a company in Sweden called BioGaia. And the product back then was called Gastrus, Gastrus. But it was made for infants because they had research. Even though the company's done a good job of doing research, it was almost all in infants. And so getting this reuteri via the product Gastrus to babies would reduce colic, kind of fussiness, and improve. So bowel movement type improvements. So big deal. But this was the species of the strain used by the MIT group. So I got hold of it. And I thought, well, the quantity of microbes is so trivial for an adult that I decided to ferment it to amplify bacterial counts. So I made it as a yogurt. I regret calling it yogurt because people think they can go to the store and buy it. You can't. That's different microbes. And of course, microbes don't have sex. There's no male and female microbes. They just double themselves, asexual reproduction. So if you make yogurt in a factory, because they're all about volume, right? Increase to hasten the production. So they ferment it for 6 hours. Well, reuteri doubles every 3 hours at human body temperature. So I let it double 12 times or 36 hours. We did flow cytometry numerous times on the yogurt. We get about 300 billion with a B per half cup serving. And we ate the yogurt. And this doesn't often happen, but all the observations made in mice prove true in humans. That is, smoother skin, acceleration of healing, increased immune response, increased testosterone, about a 50% increase in testosterone in older males, older meaning 50s and 60s and onwards. Increased libido, increased vaginal moisture in the ladies. The part I love, deep sleep. I'm a chronic insomniac. I've always struggled to sleep. Now I sleep scary. 9 hours, 9.5 hours. And I'm talking about dead sleep. No awakenings, no getting up to go to the bathroom, go to bed at 11, wake up at 8. That is so deep sleep, libido, smoother skin, increase, and all the effects of boosting the hormone oxytocin. So the MIT group showed that there was a boost in oxytocin, the hormone of love and empathy. So you'll find that people say, my relationship is better. My love for my children is even greater. My concern for my colleagues at work, my coworkers, is greater. I get along better with other people. I'm friendlier to strangers. I'm more generous. I'm more accepting of other people's opinions. Isn't that cool? So that's one microbe. So it was the first one I chose to play with. But even today, after doing this for several years, I'm still astounded at what this thing accomplishes. Another aspect of reuteri. So one of the reasons why it has so many wonderful effects is it sends a signal to your brain to release oxytocin. A lot of those effects come by oxytocin. But there's also another aspect of reuteri's behavior, and that is it is very good at surviving stomach acid and bile, and then taking up residence in the small intestine, which is very unique. Not many microbes do that. Normal microbes, healthy microbes, takes up residence small intestine, 24 feet, and then produces what are called bacteriocins, natural antibiotics effective against fecal microbes. So what we're seeing with the reuteri, it takes a few weeks to months. You consume the reuteri, in this case as yogurt. It doesn't have to be yogurt, by the way. You can ferment salsa, hummus, fruit purees, all kinds of stuff. But I just happen to choose dairy. It's just so easy to ferment. You consume the yogurt and people say, my joint pain is going away. My rosacea is going away. That is all the consequences of fecal microbes that have infested the small intestine, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. All that stuff starts to recede. Now, there's more you can do to accelerate it. But if all you did was get reuteri, I'm seeing now in 4 weeks to 12 weeks of consuming the yogurt daily or nearly daily, that even SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, is receding and all its consequences receding with it.
Wow. I mean, just a few of those listed benefits. I mean, you could literally, not to sound, with hyperbole here, but you could change the world with that by the sounds of it. Gosh, that's incredible. And
I think about that a lot, actually. So even though I love the increase, so you also get an increased muscle. I gained 13 pounds. That sounds crazy, I know, but I gained 13 pounds of muscle in
wow.
3 weeks. And I hate going, I don't know about you, I hate going to the gym. I can't stand it. So I go 15 minutes once a week, if that, and I gain 13 pounds in muscle.
I mean,
And
that's
so,
uncanny. That's insane.
and of course, that's a great advantage for health, metabolic health, physical health, protection from dementia, diabetes, heart disease, frailty, etc. So now I also would point out, so we're doing this. So it's a microbe that almost all of us have lost because while it's a very potent microbe, it's also very susceptible to common antibiotics like amoxicillin. So maybe you took amoxicillin for an upper respiratory infection 20 years ago. You lost your reuteri. So we replaced the reuteri and all this great stuff happened. But think about this. So we've lost reuteri at a time of record social isolation, pre-pandemic. Record suicide. In the US, there was a 35% increase in suicide between 2005 and 2015. Divorce, and the psychology community has been done a very good job. I did not know this in tracking narcissistic behaviors since the 1960s. The curve of increase in narcissistic behaviors is a 45-degree incline. It has increased dramatically since 1960. So questions like this, true or false? I am a very important person in this world. 1960, 13% of people say, yes, I am. Our time, 83% of people say they are, yes, I'm an important person in this world. So there's been an increase in narcissistic behavior, that is self-serving behavior to the disregard of other people around you. So that has increased. Is restoration of reuteri part of the reason and part of the solution for that? I'm not so silly as to believe that's the entire solution. There's other factors at work.
Sure.
But could it be a part of this? I think it is, because I see it now. People who do this, restore reuteri, will say things like, my relationship is better. I'm closer to the people. My husband's not very demonstrative. I'm sitting across from him, and he says to me, honey, I've always liked you. I like you more now. Come over here, sit next to me. Those kinds of wonderful human stories I'm seeing play out in people who've restored reuteri.
I think we all need a hit of that, don't we? You piqued my interest earlier there when you said it doesn't have to come from dairy, but you prefer it. And when you're making these yogurts and these fermented sources of it, I'd just love to hear a little bit more of the process. How do you recommending dairy as the source? And what are some of the other ones? You mentioned fruits, I believe. What was the other ones?
So the only times we've quantified the microbe is either I use half and half, organic half and half, because one of the things, of course, I reject is this nonsense about cutting dietary fat or saturated fat. It's nonsense. There was never evidence to suggest that saturated fat caused heart disease, and it is crumbling, but no one wants to admit the mistake. American Heart Association, Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, USDA, US Department of Health, none of them are saying, oh, that what we told you to cut saturated fat and eat more healthy. We realize now it was a huge mistake, and we contributed to the worldwide epidemics of obesity and type 2 diabetes. We're sorry, we take it back. They're not going to say that. And so it's happening organically. People are just starting to realize that's stupid. There's no evidence for that in the first place. But anyway, so I use organic half and half, but I've also used coconut milk, canned coconut milk. There's some additional steps you have to use. You have to add like guar gum because it loves to separate the fat and solids. And I also use a mixer. So it's very easy. But I've also fermented salsa, hummus, fruit purees, fruit juices. We tend to avoid fruit juices, fruit purees because they're high in sugar. Well, the great thing about fermentation is the microbes consume the sugar. Mm. So, for instance, I make a really delicious sparkling juice with mango juice, apple cider. Choose your juice, provided it has no preservatives like potassium sorbate or sodium benzoate. So just juice. The pulpier, the better. I empty a capsule, not of reuteri in this case, but of Saccharomyces boulardii, the fungus. So empty a capsule into any volume of juice, cap, agitate softly, then loosen the cap. Because at 24 hours, you're going to see it bubbling. So much carbon dioxide being produced that if you have the cap on tight, it's going to explode, literally. So you have to keep the cap loose or burp it every so often. Let it go for 48 to 72 hours. At 48 hours, you reduce sugar content by about 50%. A little further than that, they say 60 hours, 72 hours, you get almost no residual sugar. Don't want to go beyond that because you get alcohol, you get hard cider, or you get like a kind of a wine after that. So no longer than 72 hours. And of course, restoration of Saccharomyces boulardii is probably the most important thing people can do to maintain the integrity of their microbiome during a course of antibiotics. But it's a great, people call it a probiotic, but it's probably a prebiotic because Saccharomyces does not take up residence in your GI tract, but it seems to nourish bacteria. So it has this great effect, and it tastes like soda. It tastes like, so if you make it like a apple cider, you get like apple soda.
So we've got reuteri, we've got S. boulardii, which arguably is a yeast. What are there any others that are sort of highlighted by your research right now? Are those the two main ones?
So another really cool species is Lactobacillus gasseri. Like reuteri, takes up residence in the small intestine and produces a bunch of bacteriocins. It's probably one of the most important of all. So the combination of reuteri and gasseri, which you can ferment as yogurt or other foods, has been eradicating SIBO. Those two. In this case, by doing it about a month. I call it SIBO yogurt. Well, I regret that. But take it for 4 weeks, and the vast majority of people normalize. So if you're measuring, for instance, hydrogen gas in your breath with like the air device, so blow into it, it registers how much hydrogen gas you're making. Because microbes produce hydrogen gas, we do not. And you can use time. It's a mapping device to tell where microbes are living in your GI tract. Well, using that, we're having 90% of people who consume the SIBO yogurt for 4 weeks eradicate their SIBO at 4 weeks. I think it approaches 100% if you go longer, like maybe 3 months. There are people with such bad SIBO, people who say things like, oh yeah, I took antibiotics for 3 years for my acne. And now I have skin rashes, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, all the problems that come from a disrupted microbiome. And they're almost all responding to this crazy idea of SIBO yogurt. There's, of course, there's many other beneficial species. We don't have to ferment everything. Just by eating, say, things that have prebiotic fibers like onions and garlic and shallots, you can cultivate other healthy species like Faecalibacterium prosnitzii or Akkermansia nucinophila, really beneficial species. You don't have to ferment them, and you can't get them, but you can bloom them by getting certain things in your diet. For instance, you can bloom Akkermansia, which gives you all kinds of advantages in controlling blood sugar and insulin and blood pressure and mood and sleep. Well, you can bloom Akkermansia just by getting the prebiotic fiber, fructooligosaccharides and inulin. You can buy as a supplement. You can just get it from onions and garlic and other root vegetables like leeks and dandelion greens. The oleic acid of extra virgin olive oil blooms Akkermansia. Hyaluronic acid, isn't that interesting? Hyaluronic acid, of course, is what we'd get if we didn't have idiotic dietary guidelines telling us to avoid saturated fat that caused modern people to abandon consumption of organ meats. Well, if we return to eating brain and skin, as we were supposed to, like your great-grandmother did, we'd get a ton of hyaluronic acid, which blooms Akkermansia and Faecalibacterium. It's one of the very few non-plant sources of a prebiotic fiber. You don't think of fibers as sugars, but they are. They're polymers or chains of sugars. And so likewise, hyaluronic acid that we should have been getting from eating brain and skin. And so it kills me. I see people buying boneless, skinless chicken breast. What? You threw away the best. It's like skim milk. You threw away the most beneficial part of the product when you get rid of that stuff. So eat the skin, save the bones, right?
Oh, Dr. Davis, this is awesome. Yeah, thank you. Now, I want to come back to the SIBO conversation because you really piqued my interest. So many people, when they have SIBO, they're treating it with, as we've already touched on, antibiotics, antimicrobials, anti. But you're saying in this situation, you're getting significant success by coming at it in a different way, almost treating it in a health way, as opposed to, the fight. And that's by getting the good bacteria and the good yeast into the body. Is that right?
Yeah, we need to validate this formally in a clinical trial, but budget. We're not pharma. I don't have billions of dollars to spend on research. We only have hundreds of thousands, so it takes us time to generate our unique observations. But we will do the trial, probably in collaboration with the maker of the air device, Dr. Angus Short, Dublin, Ireland. So we will do that. But isn't it what I'm astounded at is how much you can achieve with the microbiome. We have now about 5 microbes, when put together, cuts your uric acid, hyperuricemia, in half or more.
Wow.
So the people with gout or have high uric acid levels, say of 7 milligrams, that acts as a cardiovascular risk factor for metabolic syndrome and prediabetes and all kinds of other metabolic derangements. Well, now you can cut it dramatically with microbes. Likewise, oxalate. You can cut it with microbes. You can address depression or anxiety with microbes. So I think we're rapidly approaching a time where, if I was a pharma executive, I'd be pooping in my pants in panic because we're going to overtake and do better than all the garbage that comes out of the pharmaceutical industry.
And what I love about your recommendations is that you can do this from home. Like, you can literally make this in your kitchen. Like, this is powerful. There's not a person listening to this that can't do this, which I love. And I think this is fantastic. Now, do you ever recommend other probiotics, like in the traditional sense, alongside of the yogurts and the fermented foods that you're making?
Sadly, probiotics I call it probiotics 1.0. They're the current crop of most probiotics are just haphazard slapdash collections of microbes. Right. Oh, we think that Bifidobacterium infantis is good. Throw it in. We think that Lactobacillus brevis is good. Throw it in. And so you just have this random collection of microbes. And then there's all kinds of gimmicks they also use, the manufacturer, because it's a competitive market. So I'm hoping we start to graduate to a smarter way to prepare to create probiotics, such as including what are called collaborative or guild effects. That is, microbes are just like people. They have families and communities, and they work with each other, and sometimes they fight with each other. And so the same thing. You want to, so the only product I know of that includes some effort at a collaborative guild are the BiotiQuest products, BIOTI Quest. My friends Martha Carlin, they're a sponsor of my podcast, by the way, so full disclosure. But they're my friends, and they're good people because they have skin in the game. They recognize it's not about money. It's about helping people, because Martha's husband has Parkinson's disease, and she abandoned her career in real estate data management and has devoted her life to understand the microbiome. And so one of her products, called Sugar Shift, created as a consortium of collaborative microbes because they consume sugars, sucrose, fructose, glucose. I gave it to 20 of my followers, and non-diabetic, and they tracked their fingerstick blood glucoses, and it reduced fasting blood glucose by 9.8 milligrams per deciliter, on a par with metformin, with none of the side effects. And there's some preliminary evidence that, so Martha's primary interest is Parkinson's disease. And so she also has made this observation, extrapolating from some in vitro data, that is, the collection of microbes in Sugar Shift consume sugars and convert them to mannitol, a sugar that humans cannot metabolize, but it has the capacity to cross into the brain, and it dissolves the alpha-synuclein that accumulates in the brains of people with Parkinson's disease. Now, anecdotally, not a formal trial. Anecdotally, she's given to a bunch of people with Parkinson's, and she's seeing partial remission. She saw her husband give up his walker, for instance, and now ambulates freely. So we need clinical trial. Very expensive to do that trial, by the way, but that's what's happening. We're starting to get insights where you can reduce uric acid, oxalates, depression, anxiety, maybe Parkinsonism, dementia, coronary disease. Is becoming extremely powerful very fast. Sadly, as you well know, it's not really trickling down to most practicing physicians, because it takes a generation for that to happen. And of course, there's no money here. And so, your listeners aren't going to have to pay all kinds of money to do this. They might have to buy some microbes, might cost $20. And by the way, once you ferment something, you let's say you make yogurt, you eat the yogurt, leave a little bit behind, a couple tablespoons, and make the next batch from that previous batch. So you buy the microbes, get them from somebody, and you never have to buy it again. So it's extremely affordable to do these kinds of things.
That's incredible. Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Where are we going to be 3 years, 5 years from now with this knowledge and, moving away from the symptomatic Band-Aid approach? Like, where else can we grow from here?
I think so. Probiotics that start to incorporate such things as collaborative guilds. One of my regrets here is what I don't want to get. I don't want to get to a point where we say, okay, if you have gout or hyperuricemia, take these microbes. If you have asthma, take these microbes. If you have irritable bowel syndrome, take these. Well, how much can you? So I'm hoping that somewhere there's a unifying theory, something that puts it all together and say, all you really have to do is, I'm making it up, get these 11 microbes and everything normalizes. You don't have gout. You don't have depression. You don't have joint pain. You don't have skin rashes. No one's gotten there yet. So right now we're still confined to playing with single microbes or groups of microbes. Maybe that solution will be a probiotic, but current probiotics will not do the job. The most important thing, in my experience, for people is to consume fermented foods, just like great grandma did. Kimchi, kombucha, right? Yogurts, but not the stuff in the store. Yogurt in the store is like going to McDonald's for a meal. You don't get healthy going there. You got to do it yourself.
Grandma knows best. I love it. The title of your next book, Dr. Davis.
Yeah, not a bad idea.
Not bad, right? Yeah. But listen, this is powerful stuff. This is simple stuff. Anyone can do this. Is there anything else that we should know about, simple at-home tools to, get those missing microbes, get that metabolism going, get that gut healthier? What else would you leave us with today?
Well, we have odd fads because dietary guidelines have been such an unmitigated disaster. Right? It's contributed to the world's epidemics of obesity and diabetes, even though they won't admit it. Mm-hmm. But so people have tried to come up with their own solutions. And unfortunately, some of the solutions are awful, like ketogenic or carnivorous diets. That is, diets devoid of fibers, essentially. Well, we know, one of the great ironies is a ketogenic diet is the best studied diet there is because, as you know, it was used to treat children with intractable grand mal seizures. Terrible problem. Your 4-year-old's having 10 seizures a day. Brain damage, physical injury, terrible. So one of the solutions that's been used over the last century, 100 years, is a ketogenic diet. And it reduces seizure frequency by about 50% usually. Well, what happens to those kids on a ketogenic diet? They stop growing. They develop osteopenia. These are children. These aren't old people. These are children. They develop osteopenia. They develop oxalate kidney stones. They become constipated. And they have major disruptions in bowel flora composition, specifically proliferation of Akkermansia. So Akkermansia is good for us, Akkermansia muciniphila. It helps you regulate blood pressure, blood sugar, better mental health, unless it comes to dominate your GI tract, which it does. So when you starve Akkermansia, so Akkermansia loves fibers and the oleic acid of olive oil and hyaluronic acid. So Akkermansia loves those things. You feed it, it's happy, you're happy. When you starve it of those fibers, it has the added capacity to consume human mucus, Akkermansia muciniphila, mucus lover, and it starts to eat you. And you get colitis and intestinal inflammation. You get what's called endotoxemia. That is the breakdown products of microbes that enter the bloodstream, endotoxin, endotoxemia. And that's how you get effects like psoriasis and rosacea and depression and diverticular disease, colon cancer. So you got to feed the microbes. It's just like your dog. If you have your dog chained up in the backyard and it can't hunt and you don't feed it, it's going to be dead. It may take a week, but it's going to be dead. If you don't feed your garden of vegetables, you're not going to have many vegetables. So you got to feed them. So the same thing with the microbes in our GI. You got to feed them. And if you don't feed them, bad stuff happens.
Well, Dr. Davis, thank you. Where can we learn more about you online? Where can we find out where your books are? Tell everyone where the easiest spot to find you online.
So the books are anywhere books are sold, Amazon, bookstores, etc. I do have, I try to consolidate all my properties, got a little out of control. So the main property is drdavisinfinitehealth.com. Long name. There's also an inner circle there where it's paid membership site where we have like two-way Zooms every week. And there's about 2,000 blog posts. I have a podcast called Defiant Health, where I talk about and rant about what's wrong with healthcare and the solutions that people can. And as you point out, I love solutions that are inexpensive, accessible, and people can do on their own and not have to go to the doctor or hospital to obtain. So, so the blog is called drdavisinfinitehealth.com blog. So
awesome. Yeah, well, that's great. Well, everyone's going to be tuning in. And listen, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know how busy you are. We've already got the name of your next book nailed down, so we're all good there. And right, but appreciate everything that you've done for us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Take care.